It gives me great pleasure to welcome these wonderful women to our conference. Gráinne Healy described them yesterday as the spark that started the referendum campaign, and boy were they some spark. I remember many years ago, and I tell this story often, there's two things. One, Catherine Ann Louise gathered people around and said, this is what we're planning to do. And as we often say affectionately, as they're known as the lesbian royalty, that we thought they were a little bit cracked and that it was a nice idea, but they were such nice women that sure we'd give them a hand. And look where we are now. What a journey they have brought us on. They travelled the country persuading people. They were uncompromising in their pursuit of marriage equality. Paul and I were once at a session in Sligo in a part of the country. And as Mary said yesterday, it was a group of radical feminists, and access to the institution of marriage was not high on their agenda. And I was speaking a little bit about marriage equality the night before, and all I kept saying to Paula is, oh my God, they're going to be killed. They're going to be killed. They're going to come up here and talk about love and commitment, and they are going to be killed. So they came. They did talk about love and commitment, but they also talked about the exclusion of a group of people, exclusion from a fundamental basic human right, the right to marry, if you wanted to, the right to parent, the right to have legal recognition for your love. And when I say they had those radical feminists eating out of their hand by the time they left, and if you knew them, and some of you do, that was no mean feat. So I kind of thought then, you know what, there's something in it. And they persuaded me, all of you, so many people, to be uncompromising as well in our pursuit of marriage equality. They met in September as students in 1981, and they had a small, intimate life partnership ceremony to celebrate that love and commitment. And it wasn't until their 30th wedding anniversary that they were able to get married, and they did so in Vancouver. Watch out, Irish State. That's where it all started, the well-known case, Zappone and Gilligan versus the Revenue Commissioners. As people know, they sought recognition in the High Court for their Canadian marriage. They challenged the Irish State in its constitutional pledge to defend the equal rights of all its citizens, acknowledging that gay and lesbians deserve the protection, rights, responsibilities and dignities that civil marriage afforded to couples. And as I say, they travelled the country, making sure that LGBTI families had right to this very important institution. So, for those who are from Ireland, and I'm sure internationally as well, this isn't the only issue that they've been transformative in. They have transformed many social issues in Ireland. So a little bit about them both. Ann Louise Gilligan is a feminist theologian. She worked in Spain. She studied in Paris. She retired by St. Patrick's College to teach theology. She's been a massive voice in educational disadvantage. Her academic prowess, focusing on subjects like education and gender. She's a force to be reckoned with. The other thing about Ann Louise is that she is a fantastic cook. So there's many a social change movement that started with warm scones in the kitchen. I'm going to introduce Ann Louise. She's going to speak first. Thank you very much.
And thank you for your words. Now, is it here I stand, Denise?
Sorry, yes, Ann Louise.
That's grand. Thank you very much indeed. And I think I'll put on the glasses. Good morning to you all. And I have to say it's an enormous privilege and pleasure to be here. And above all, I want to thank Gráinne. I thought I saw Gráinne there, but Gráinne and Denise for inviting us here to be with you as part of this extraordinary celebration of marriage equality over the past days. I know they've done enormous work as they've worked over many, many years for marriage equality with us and with so many others. But this is a great achievement, but also it's wonderful to be here for Catherine and for I. Now, just to say, I'm kind of terrible on time, so I'm going to be terrible strict today. But here we are, and we have been very graciously given this period whereby I will give the opening remarks, what I was asked to do, although Denise in her gracious introduction has covered much of it so nicely. Thank you, Denise. But that I would tell our story and just draw out some of the learnings that may be of importance to some, and indeed what we would love from certainly my introduction, that you engage the dialogue in the last period of our time together. After I kind of do my piece, Catherine will follow, so we hope to take the hour, but I'm not sure that whatever you wish, with about a quarter of an hour, the second, and then the main thing for us is that dialogue at the end. And we really want to hear objections, criticisms, whatever you want to say, but that's where we will learn and love to hear from each of you. And it's wonderful to know that so many countries are here represented. So please hold that in mind. If you want to take a little note here and there, say what you want to contribute to add to the conversation at the end. So thank you, and thank you again for having us here. As Denise said, Catherine and I met in 1981. Boston College that year, and you can say a lot of this might be just coincidence, complete chance, or you might use an old-fashioned word that I use now and then, and it's called providence. I don't know what that means, by the way, but maybe it was meant to be. But anyway, there was, on that occasion in 1981, two, and only two, because it was a new program, a doctorate, interdisciplinary in theology, philosophy, and education, and so they only would take 2 students. I didn't know this, by the way, when I applied and got accepted, but when I heard there was only 1 other student, I nearly had a heart attack. I had sold my car, given up my house, took sabbatical from the job, and said, good God, what have I let myself in for? But anyway, I decided to head on. Initially, I didn't know whether the other candidate was going to be a man or a woman, but when I got there, I heard it was going to be a woman, and I, as would be my wont, was at the back of the hall, waiting for the induction day to begin for Boston College. Lots of people, different programs. And suddenly, after sitting there some time, the door opened. This is the absolute truth. And this woman came through the door, black curly hair, very smartly dressed, lovely suit, leather briefcase, and in she came. And I said to myself, I bet you that's herself. And in she came and sat in front of me. And I was there in the last cardigan my mother had knitted for me. She had died shortly before that, and this was very dear to me. So here was I in an Irish knitted jumper and herself ahead of me, and I said, I wonder. But anyway, we'll wait and see. And yes, it was herself, and we got to know each other. We had to get to know each other over the next few days as we were inducted into the study. But I have to tell you, the study kind of went a bit out of the window, because in those opening 5-6 weeks, I got to know this woman more and more. Initially, I liked her. One night, and just I would say, yes, it was a liking. One night she invited me to dinner. Neither of us had much money at the time, and I went along. We were very different in so many ways, and when I arrived in the little kitchen she had, there was a lobster walking across the counter. She said, I love lobster. I was a vegetarian. And I watched this thing walking across, and I said, good God, will I tell her now? Or will I? So next we had boiling water, in goes the lobster, and I said, really, this is too much, but not to worry, we kept chatting. And I still knew that not only was I growing in liking this woman, I was starting to love this woman. I could feel and I knew I was really, there was something moving within me. As we say, we were surprised by love. Catherine can tell you her version, but I did. And it just became ever more evident. I was in love. Now, for me, this was a bit unusual. I'd never permitted myself to be in love with a woman before. I didn't know that that really was something you did permit yourself. I'd had a few relationships with men which certainly did not work out, but I could see that I was falling in love. And by the 10th of November, Catherine said to me, I want to be with you for the rest of my life. So you could say this was all very rapid, and it was, but it was right. And I said, well, so do I. And so that was, as I say, but a few months after meeting. So that was 19, then we were coming into 82, and we both loved ritual, and we decided we would have a partnership ceremony. And we had our first partnership ceremony where we committed to each other for life in a beautiful home on the North Shore of Boston, which, by the way, was freezing cold because as students at Boston College, we had accommodation down there. We gave that up, and in Catherine's little yellow Beetle, we went. Actually, it was orange Beetle, but we were always a bit different on colours. But anyway, we used to tootle up and down the road 70 miles actually, from Boston every day and back to our home. And there we had our first partnership ceremony. That, as I say, just allows you to get a little feel for those opening moments. There was no hesitation, there was no great wondering, should we, shouldn't we? It was just clear, this was love, this was right. And whatever the consequences, we both had that kind of temperament. Here, we're going for this. In case you feel those opening years in Boston were simply a love fest, well, they were a bit actually. We were there to do a doctoral program and very serious exams by the third year. But anyway, we did love what was happening around the Boston area at the time, and it totally shaped us. At the time, you could study, if you were in Boston College, in any of the 9, they would call them the consortium, many of you in this audience would know this, the consortium of universities in the area. So you could go over to Harvard and take a course in feminist philosophy and have it accredited. You could go into Boston itself and do a course in liberation theologies. Extraordinary. So our minds were just being open. Black theology was on the agenda. So this was a whole formation of mind. And by the way, I just really believe in the power of ideas to shape the revolution. And this shaped us and shaped everything that went ahead. We were in Cuba a few years ago, and there used to be big placards. They weren't advertising the next L'Oreal products. The big placards were always phrases that were political. And of course, as you know, that was one of Castro's great phrases. So by 1983, we had to return to Ireland. Why Ireland? Well, as Catherine said, I had a job to go back to, and I suppose I had a little house. So why not? And back we headed. But very quickly we were very clear we were not going back to Ireland simply to live in suburbia or to work mundane jobs. We really wanted to do something like we had experienced together and loved in Boston, especially our engagement with about 3 different social projects, which had hugely influenced us when we probably should have been studying, but we really were formed by, for example, Wellspring project. Many of you would know it in Boston, where the two women running it were quickly friends of ours, for these were women who were victims of family violence with their children, who were offered new opportunity for a new life, and they did it very, very beautifully. Rosie's Place down in Boston, where every night, not just us alone, hundreds of people would come in a very mutual way to serve hundreds of women and children who were homeless and on the street. Or another friend of mine who was running a project for really, well, the project was understanding the lives of women that lived on the street. And being with her, the conclusion very quickly was so many of the women living on the streets of Boston were living there for many reasons, but mental illness was the key issue. And it was an extraordinary project and an extraordinary work. So we brought all of that learning, understanding back with us, and we decided we were moving from Dublin to a suburban area that was being written a lot about. And I remember moving back to Ireland at that time was moving to a huge recession. It was utterly different from anything I'd say Catherine ever had experienced, but Ireland was in the grips of a dreadful recession. But back we came, and they were building these almost like satellite towns like West Tala, and then writing about these areas as no-go areas, areas of profound poverty. But we bought this house, we bought the shanty very deliberately, because that we wanted to be in partnership with. We wanted to get to know, above all, women and children were our focus, because we knew there were many areas we had no background in, and that was where we began. One of the things that happened that was extraordinary in engaging in the Shanty Educational Project was, in my opinion, and I always remember this, the generosity of the women we met. Here are two women, one American, the other Irish. By then they were saying two American ladies, because I had such an accent from herself. But down we went to the community. Different people introduced us to the community. And I always remember one man saying to us, if you want to do anything in partnership with the community, above all, I would advise start with the leaders. And so we did. And he very graciously, being a huge leader himself in the community, named 12 women who were doing enormous work in the community of West Tala, which grew to 30,000 people, 90% unemployed. It was really an area of huge challenges. But these women knew the community and became part of one of our first management teams. But it was their generosity. We gradually fundraised, got a bus, because remember, it was 6 kilometres up the road to come to us. And we just opened our house, because there was nothing on down there in Jobestown at that time to create any kind of space for us to start. But these women said, we'll be with you. Let's do this together. They believed in education and believed in the lives of their children. And one of the things to say about the Shanty Educational Project today, called An Casáin now, which I'll come to, was very much... Pardon?
To interrupt you. Just 5 minutes left. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all, and thank you. So that was where we began. We both got jobs, and lots of people often say, are you ever discriminated against? And we lived as a couple. We never denied we were a couple, but we never came out as a couple. I would have lost my job within roughly 5 minutes, because the Archbishop was manager of the college of the university that I worked within. So no, it wasn't appropriate for me to tell anybody if we wanted a job. So I didn't share that with anybody. we kept going, but in the mid-90s, I became quite seriously ill. I got breast cancer. And just again, to show Catherine's extraordinary love of me and my love of her, she was in the middle of an MBA program, and without thinking, she said, I'm taking a sabbatical out of that. I'll mind you for a year. Come on, we're going to have a great year. I got time out of college, and we had a great year, and she did love me back to health. Not the first time she did that in her life, but she certainly did. On the job front, Gráinne Healy interviewed Catherine for her position in the national CEO of the National Women's Council, and she became that and loved that work for many years. And I changed departments and did get permission from Education Department to set up a centre there for educational disadvantage. So many things happened, but definitely it was an extraordinary time. But one day we had decided that we wanted to go to Chile, but we better look at our wills. And when we looked at our wills, our legal people described to us, you know, if one of you die, you will not be treated the same as any married couple, even in your partnership. You will be treated differently and negatively. You will not have the wills that you think you have, because in fact the property will not have the same resource to the one that's left as if you had a different situation. So that was something that profoundly impacted us, and it was not about money that we decided to take the case. So my father always used to say to us as kids, never tolerate an injustice. And this was simply an injustice too far. And we began to think, well, what will we do here? We are going to go forward, and we started planning to take a case, which we did. And in the middle of our planning to take a case, and so many of the people in this room were with us in that planning, we then heard through my brother who lived in Vancouver, Canada, and Catherine's brother was up there at a conference, that actually Vancouver had passed marriage equality, and you didn't have to be a resident before you could be accepted. So we started to plot and plan. I'd say it's my time. And I will now let you have Catherine to take up how our marriage in Canada was the first step to the next phase. It was an amazing moment, that gaze of affirmation on that day in Vancouver. Catherine's parents were there of 82 years, and members of my family, my sister in her big hat there to celebrate. By the way, we had never come out to any of these people, but at least I hadn't. We told them beforehand, getting married is coming out par excellence.
Well done.